Welcome to Education Truth Project's first in a series of live programs. My name is Matt Kazmerzak, and I am the founder and executive director. Education Truth Project was founded with the goal of advocating for common sense school board candidates and policies. We want local school board meetings to be non-political and, quite frankly, boring again. We believe right now the best way to advance that goal is to support ending book bans in not only Illinois and now New Jersey, but in as many states as possible. Think about how much time is wasted because an individual or small group of extremists demands a book be removed from school library. We are simply saying it's time for the politics to be waged at the state level and not with local volunteers. Every district and state have different issues and challenges, but one thing has been constant. There's a national political effort being waged by extremist groups to not only whitewash our history, but also by censoring marginalized groups by removing books. We hear every day local schools, officials, and public education teachers crying out for help. We keep hearing, we need help. This week, the government in Illinois provided help with a roadmap to getting it done. Thank you, Governor Pritzker and the Illinois legislature for enacting this historic law. I'm proud to say in my home state of New Jersey, we have leaders who are paying attention. New Jersey is now the second state to introduce a bill to stop book bans. We still need help in New Jersey getting this bill over the finish line. Because of this, we are asking for your assistance by having you sign on to our petition to end book bans. The petition will be sent to Governor Murphy and other district legislators. Even if you don't live in New Jersey, your signature matters. This brings me to our panel. Tonight, we have three people that are right in the thick of the battle on this issue, each with different roles with different perspectives to share. We have the youngest ever member of the state legislature from Illinois who supported and voted for the new law. We also have a school board member from the largest district in Illinois, and to round out our panel, a longtime award-winning New Jersey school librarian. It's important to point out how crucial librarians are in this campaign to end book bans. To introduce and moderate the panel tonight is Education Truth Project Field and Program Director Cheryl Robertson, who also happens to be a school board trustee in her district in California. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful program on ending book bans. My name is Cheryl Robertson, and like Matt said, I am the Field and Programs Director for Education Truth Project. I'm also a former special education teacher and community organizer, and as well as a school board trustee at a school district here in California where I'm located. First, I'd like to introduce you to a special education program assistant with a bachelor's degree in English education from Iowa State University, a graduate diploma in disability service studies, and certificates in health and fitness. She has experience teaching English literature, GED recovery, violence prevention, and comprehensive sex education, both in the United States and abroad. Please welcome lifelong educator and Illinois school board member of the largest school board in Illinois, Kimberly Cavill.
Hi, thanks for the invitation and thanks for having me.
Welcome, thank you. Second, I would like to introduce another amazing woman with a bachelor's degree in English from Rutgers University, a master's in library and information sciences also from Rutgers. Frequently described as feisty, she is an award-winning New Jersey librarian honored with the American Library Association's 2022 Lemony Snicket Prize for noble librarians faced with adversity for her fearless opposition to the resolution brought before her school board to ban 5 books representing the LGBTQ+ community and standing by her students' freedom to read. Please welcome Martha Hickson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Cheryl, for that introduction. Feisty, noble, and fearless. I'm going to run with it.
You should. That's exactly what you are. And then finally, it is my honor to introduce another amazing young woman inspired by the far right's attacks on important issues like abortion and immigration. This young community organizer turned politician used her previous experience working with organizations like Emily's List, as well as local campaigns, to take on a Republican incumbent in Illinois' 51st General Assembly District. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and business administration from the University of California at Berkeley, and has made history as both the youngest woman, the first Muslim woman, and the first Indian American woman to serve in the Illinois General Assembly. Please welcome Representative Nabeela Syed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, to all of you amazing women. I would like to start off kind of with a little bit of an easier question, just to kind of get everything kind of rolling. So just thinking about kind of like growing up in like the books that you've experienced, a meaningful or impactful book has the potential to promote acceptance, elicit empathy, or even inspire someone to take their life in a whole new direction. In what way or ways have books made an impact on your life? And for this one, I would like to start with Martha Hickson.
Oh, okay. My very earliest memories are associated with books. I have this very vivid memory of sitting in my father's lap reading, now here I'm going to date myself, Bennett Cerf's Book of Riddles. I'll even tell you one. What disappears every time you stand up? Your lap.
Oh.
That's how old that book was. But, and when I was a little bit older, when we moved into the childhood home in which I grew up, the bookmobile from the Somerset County Library parked right in front of my house. That was better than a trip to Disneyland for me. So reading was immersed throughout my childhood. Some memorable books for me were Harriet the Spy. I had this book of 1-minute biographies that I used to read every night before I went to bed. I used to love to browse the encyclopedia. And when I got a little older, I'm old enough that there wasn't the robust young adult genre that there is today. I went straight from Nancy Drew into like The Godfather by Mario Puzo, that kind of stuff. So I've read widely forever. But one of the most interesting experiences is when I started library school at Rutgers at the age of 42, I think I was. On my first day, I was taking a children's literature class by a legendary library professional named Kay Vandergrift. And I came home from that class so inspired. And I went to my bookshelf and I had an anthology called The Big Book to Grow On that I had when I was a kid. I opened it up and something fluttered to the ground. In fact, I have it right here. It was my library card from when I was in the 4th grade. And I took that as a sign from the universe that, Martha, you went in the right direction, changing careers to librarianship. But there it is. That you probably can't see it very well. But I looked at the books that were on it, and the reading habits that I had when I was in the 4th grade continued to this day. I love to read historical fiction, biographies, realistic fiction, and they're all here from 4th grade. So I feel really grateful to have been raised in a home where there were plenty of books around. It was an information-rich environment, books, newspapers, and so on. And I recognize what a privilege that was, because it's not true for everyone.
That's so wonderful. I would also now like to open that up, same question, to Representative Syed.
Yeah, I think books very much shaped my entire childhood. I was a big fan of Genevieve Jones. I was a big fan of the Magic Tree House. And I think that like at every single point in my early years, I could identify a book that I related to and a book that I used to get me through the days, or a book that my educators might have passed along to me. So I think, at every single step, books have enriched my life. And even now, I think I wish I could say that I read books that are very educational and help me with my job, but I really use books as an outlet to get away from my life and to immerse myself into a story that I care about, and a story that has absolutely nothing to do with me, which is very nice to get away from things. And I feel like as a society, we've forgot especially with streaming, with television, the way it has kind of sunk its claws into our society, we've kind of forgotten about how important books are as a form of entertainment. And I really look forward to, even just these past few years of my life, pivoting away from television and going back to books. So that's just a little personal relationship that I've had with books throughout my entire life.
I love that. And Kim, how have books impacted you?
I've been a lifelong bookworm. I read very early, and I read typically well beyond my years and very widely. I'm blessed to be able to read very quickly. So I'll tell you, I we moved towns when I was in the middle of fifth grade, which is a difficult time to move. We met from a small city to a really small town where everybody had known each other way longer than I had been there. And I felt very lonely and isolated at that time in my life. But I had my bike and I had my library card. And so I had a routine summers of junior high. I'd get up and I'd eat breakfast and I'd bike to the library and I'd check out 5 books. I'd go home, I'd read them, and I'd repeat them again the next day. And I remember the summer before I was in eighth grade, I went to the library like I typically did. And the librarian who I was close to, her name was Pam, lovely person. She had a cupcake sitting on her library counter by the old school computer, And I said, well, what's the cupcake? Is it your birthday? She said, no, this is for you. And I said, oh, what for? My birthday's not till September. And she said, well, you've read every book in the junior section. And she said, we don't have any more books in that section for you to read. So let me introduce you to Agatha Christie. She's right over here. She took me by, and I've read voraciously ever since. I still do, even now as an adult. And I'm very glad to see that my children are the same, especially my eldest one. And I'm a hardliner about this, that kids should have free access to what's on those library shelves. And with very rare exceptions, they roam freely, like they daydream freely. And so I've allowed my sons to do the same thing. And our house is still very full of books. In fact, AJ's my eldest. His Christmas list this year was just a list of 21 hardcover books that he wanted because he's got his library, and Lord help you if you try to move something out of order. He's very passionate about it. So books matter a lot in this house to everyone.
I love that. These stories are exactly why these conversations are so important. Moving forward a little bit, we are seeing an unprecedented number of books and publications being targeted for censorship. And according to PEN America, censorship of themes centered on race, history, sexual orientation, and gender have all increased over the last year. Why is it important that we have diverse and inclusive representation in literature? And how can reading books by authors from different cultures and backgrounds foster kind of a sense of inclusivity and broaden our own perspectives? And for this one, I would like to start with Representative Syed.
Yeah, I'm a very strong believer that in anything in life, like we need diversity, we need diverse people of diverse backgrounds, sexual orientations, lived experiences, having a seat at the table. And that was a big reason why I ran for office, because, before I was on, you mentioned, being the first Indian woman, being the first Muslim woman. And the fact that we didn't have that kind of representation before, it resulted in our communities not being advocated for as hard as we should have been advocated for. And I think that is so important in books. I'm a big fan. I'll just say it, off the bat, that I love a good romance book. I love them. And those are the types of books that I turn to when I'm like, I want to read something. I want to be away from this. I want to immerse myself into a book. And I love romance books. And I love to see representation in those books. Growing up, as I'm 24. When I was running for office, I was 22. I got elected at 23. I'm 24 now. And I cannot tell you a single point in my childhood where growing up, at least between kindergarten through 6th grade, there was not a single point where I didn't want to be white. And it sometimes embarrasses me to say that. But I did not see myself represented on TV. I did not see myself represented in books. And just now I'm coming across these romance books where people of color, Black women, Indian women, we have South Asian, like books about South Asian couples and interracial relationships. And those just like fill my heart because I can see myself reflected in those stories and in those lived experiences. And I think back to that. I wear my hijab very proudly. I'm very proud of my identity. And I sometimes can't believe that growing up, I really, really just wanted to be white because that's what I would see around me. So the impact of representation and the impact of those stories being told, whether it's covering a very serious topic, whether it's touching upon history and the history of our country, or whether it's in a lighthearted manner of just the character being South Asian, and they're living their normal day-to-day life. Those stories matter, and they make me so happy. So I'm excited that this next generation is growing, hopefully with untethered access to these books, unobstacled access to these books, unhindered access, that's the word, to these books. And I just pray that continues on, and that needs to be backed with legislation, that needs to be backed with support in the community too.
I love that. And I'm sorry that was your experience. And I would have to say, I'm just going to add, and then we'll get to the other two. My partner and I were foster parents, and that is something we have seen in many of our foster children who are children of color, that denial of heritage or that denial of identity that really they should be proud of, and they should be part of them because they're beautiful in their true selves. And so I think it's really great that people of your stature and who have gone as far as you've gone are able to say these things out loud. That's super important. So thank you for that. And then, so now I want to go ahead and give Kim a chance to answer the question.
I think there's something really special about reading and books in particular that act as lots of different things, but one of the functions that they serve are as windows into other people's lives, other walks of life, other points in history, in ways that I don't believe video content and, even with as much as I love podcasts, immersive podcast experiences don't have quite the same effect for people who are partaking in those, for listeners or witnesses. There's something in particular about reading because, you certainly intake the words on the page, but your imagination has to fill in all of the rest. And it is an amalgamation of your personal experience with the window that you're being provided through the book. And so it's a very effective way of broadening your horizons without ever leaving your town. And that's one of the things that I relied on quite heavily until I was finally old enough to leave. My world was very, very small when I was growing up. I'm from downstate Illinois. My mother and then, my father and then my stepfather, the men that I had to deal with on a daily basis were very controlling people. I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music or read anything that wasn't from an evangelical Christian author or production company until I earned my own money to buy my own media. So my first CD was Metallica, much to my mother's dismay. And my library card was really the 1 ounce of intellectual freedom that I afforded in my house. And I think it's really, really important because of that function that it provides. And that's honestly why this particular avenue is under attack. We have a lot of representation in popular culture, music, Netflix, streaming video content, YouTube, etc. But books are the number one cultural enemy, and I think it's really because there's something magical about the act of reading in particular. And so when you have diverse authors' experiences reflecting in the material that you can pick up, and the magic that comes from partaking in that material and seeing yourself walking in somebody else's shoes, the degree of empathy that results, the degree of open-mindedness and understanding that results, the encouragement of critical thinking, just as, you know, partaking in reading as a process, as an intellectual process. These are all things that I really strongly believe in, and you know, that's why I'm so passionate about this issue in particular.
Wow, that's what an experience. I very much appreciate that you've shared that. And Martha, I'd like to give you the opportunity as well to comment on that.
Well, Kim and Nabeela's answers both touched my heart greatly. I always take these questions from the reader's point of view. I'm always trying to see things from the reader. And for me, as a high school librarian, I am with my readers day in and day out. I'm with teenagers all day. And Nabeela, I wish you could have been a student in my library. I just took down a display of DESE LGBTQ romances that I put up by student request. And it was an adorable display. I just loved it. But part of the experience of adolescence is just the developmental phase that they go through, is that it's a very self-centered time of life, sort of by necessity. And in that time, kids often believe that they're the only one, you know, experiencing something, that there's no one else on earth that's going through what they're going through. And it is a difficult and sometimes dangerous feeling, especially if you are a member of a marginalized population. And I'm thinking specifically in this case about my LGBTQ plus kids. And that sense of isolation for them places them at greater risk for real harm, self-harm, even death. So having books that serve as a mirror, which is what Nabeela was talking about, and seeing their experience reflected through another person's words creates a very powerful connection and a feeling of belonging and being seen. And it's a relief to know that you're not alone. And, you know, one of the most frequently attacked books these days is George M. Johnson, All Boys Aren't Blue. And if you think about all the different levels of relating that can go on with that book, about the experience of growing up as a Black young man in America, about the experience of growing up as gay or gender nonconforming, about the experience of sexual abuse. There are so many entry points for so many kids into that book that so many people want to take away. And then I think about my own experience, to get to Kim's point of windows, being able to experience a life that's totally different from your own. When I read Genderqueer, I got most of the way through the book, and I just kept thinking it was very much of almost a pastiche of Fun Home, which is another book that I very much enjoyed. And then I don't know how many of you have read Genderqueer, but there is a page that freaks everybody out. And the Moms for Liberty people turn it into poster-size images that they walk around with, despite the fact that they're so freaked out about it. No one ever talks about what happens when you turn that page. I won't get into that now. But when I got to that page in that book, I will admit my eyebrows went up. And then I had to stop myself, and I'm like, Martha, why are your eyebrows up? And I sat in my own discomfort for about a minute, and I realized, oh, my eyebrows are up because this is something I have never experienced. I am totally unfamiliar with this. And this is what we call learning and growth. I'm like, I now understand a life that I have no access to at that time I was 62 when I read it, a 62-year-old straight cis woman. That's not my way in the world. And now I understand how somebody else lives. Turn the page. But so many people get stuck on the page and stuck in their own life and unwilling to make that journey.
That's amazing. Listening to you women is just incredible. Representative Syed, I know that you were only able to join us for just the first half hour. I wanted to see if maybe you have time to answer one more question before you hop off. And then when you wrap it up, you can go ahead and tell everybody. You can say goodbye if you would like. Recently, legislation passed in Illinois meant to deter publicly funded institutions from banning books. What are some of the key arguments or evidence that can be used to persuade other lawmakers to support initiatives aimed at ending book bans? And can you think of any past advocacy campaigns or legislative efforts that have made a positive impact on the availability of literature?
Yeah, awesome. Happy to talk about this. So the Secretary of State, Alexi Janulius, who's our new Secretary of State in many, many years, since 1999, which happens to be the year I was born, he really, him and his office really cared about putting forth this legislation to ban book bans. And the way that it works is that if there is a public library receiving a state grant, which is nearly 99% of the libraries in the state of Illinois, they cannot ban books. And if they do, then their state grant is in jeopardy. And the purpose of this is to make sure that public libraries are serving the public with unobstructed access to books, definitely not falling into the pitfalls of, far right extremists that are coming and threatening library trustees, because at this point their hands are tied by law. And the law is requiring them to not ban books, or else they lose state funding for their library. So this is historic, first of its kind in the nation legislation. And it fell on party lines, of course. Democrats voted for it, Republicans voted against. But the thing that I like to tell people when it comes to talking about legislation regarding book bans is whatever community that you care about, they will be next in line. Whether it's a religious community, whether it's a racial group, whether it's, related to sexual orientation, the LGBTQ community, every single person that you can think of, I truly believe this. If we let the far right extremists have their way, that every single community will become a victim of this besides them. And I want everyone to, that's the biggest argument I use, that like, if there's any person in your life that you could think of that you care about, and you want them to know that they're reflected in the literature, that they're reflected in these books, that their history is being told and not being obstructed, then you should vote in favor of this kind of legislation of banning book bans. And I think there needs to be concrete efforts to also extend this to how can we make sure that like these far right-wing minority voices, I truly believe they're in the minority, they're just happen to be the loudest voices, are not coming and attacking our school boards and not demanding certain things of our school boards, and protecting school board members from that kind of hate and that vitriol too. Because, this kind of legislation is first of its kind in the nation, but it's unfortunate that we even have to do something like this. So that's the biggest thing that I just want to highlight, is that like for any group, I really do believe like any group can become a victim to this, the way that they're advocating for these book bans and the reasoning that they're using. And it shouldn't be that you have to be personally affected to care about legislation or to care about this issue. But for some folks, that might be the case. And that's what I would say to them too. But no, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for doing advocacy on this important issue. And it was so wonderful to learn more from you, Kim. I always learn from you, but I'm so glad to learn more from you, and so wonderful to meet and learn from you, Martha. Thank you all so much. Have a great one.
Thank you so much, Representative Syed. Thank you, ladies, for being able to be here for the remainder of the session. Back to that question. I'm just gonna, that was so beautiful. I just want to remind everybody what the question was. So what are some of the key arguments that can be used to persuade other lawmakers to support initiatives aimed at book bans, ending book bans? And then can you think of past campaigns, legislative efforts, or advocacy to? And so let's go to Martha on this.
Well, I tend to get all, patriotic around this. So I talk about things like reading is a foundational skill. It is critical to an informed electorate and our democracy. That is why the founding fathers blessed us with a First Amendment. Decades of precedent tell us, and of course, I'm always thinking about my students, tell us that students have First Amendment rights. They are not abridged just because of their age. And you could look at cases like Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969, United States Supreme Court, where they said that students don't leave their rights at the schoolhouse gate. Of course, for me as a school librarian, I hang my hat on Island Trees v. Pico, 1982, where the Supreme Court again said that school boards can't remove library books simply because they disagree with the content. There are others, Montero v. Tempe Union, 1998, which had to do with Huckleberry Finn, Counts v. Cedarville, which had to do with getting parents' permission on Harry Potter books. That was not permitted. But when you get right down to it, book banning is un-American. And a lot of people feel the same way. An ALA survey last year found that majorities on both sides of the political aisle disagree with book banning. An Ipsos poll just 2 weeks ago at the start of June found that 2/3 of Americans oppose state lawmakers or school boards banning books. And Nabeela mentioned the loud minority, and it is such a tiny minority. I hope everybody saw the recent Washington Post article where they analyzed the roughly 1,100 book bans across the country that occurred during 2021, 2022. And they found that 11, 10 plus 1 people were responsible for 60% of those challenges.
That's just insane.
So in terms of legislators and trying to convince them, my message to them is from a self-preservation perspective. If you want to retain your seat, placating book banners is catering to a very tiny minority of people, like 11. And then from a legacy perspective, history has never remembered book banners as the good guys, and you do not want to be remembered among that crew. Now, in terms of advocacy, I mean, you can go all the way back to, say, the Enlightenment in the 17th or 18th centuries, where you have people like Voltaire and Locke and Rousseau, talking about freedom of thought, and they are actually the foundation for our First Amendment. The First Amendment itself has been a very instrumental advocacy tool for preventing book bans. You've got things like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which included the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information as part of its document, and that's been influential around the world. Even the Catholic Church gave up book banning in the mid-1960s. It got rid of its index of prohibited books, which was a great stride toward intellectual freedom. And then there are wonderful organizations that are doing terrific work and have been personally helpful to me, like the American Library Association, National Coalition Against Censorship, PEN America, Every Library, and the ACLU. I already mentioned one of the ACLU's most famous cases, Island Trees v. Pico in 1982. And then one of my favorite initiatives was also born in 1982, and that is Banned Books Week. And that was started by Judith Krug, who is the head of the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom, after the rise of the moral majority following the election of Ronald Reagan. And believe it or not, 40 years ago, we saw a very similar period of intense book banning, which is what prompted Judith Krug to launch Banned Books Week, which is the annual celebration of the right to read. Schools, libraries, museums, bookstores around the country celebrate it. This year it's going to be October 1st through 7th. The theme is Let Freedom Read, just like is on my shirt. But every year I do a display and a contest in my school library about Banned Books Week. And every year the kids come in, and it's the same reaction. I get it every year and it cracks me up. They're like, what? People still ban books? And I'll have a display of frequently banned books up, and they'll be like, why would anybody want to ban Harry Potter? And I have to talk them through it. And the kids all say, that's ridiculous, because in so many ways, kids are smarter than adults. But I give them the information to educate them, and maybe they can help educate the adults in their lives. But if anybody needs information about banned books, it's at bannedbooksweek.org.
Yes, exactly. And like it's funny that you're talking about like the ridiculousness of some of them, because like as I've been doing more research on this topic, like some of the most ridiculous ones that I've come across are like the Lorax and like Charlotte's Web, like have like classic books like from my childhood. Um and
And for
over
crazy reasons,
yeah.
like Captain Underpants, disrespectful.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say he's not my favorite, but my son loves him. Kim, would you like to add anything to Martha gave a very, very well-rounded answer, but I want to give you the opportunity to add anything if you would like to.
Sure. I mean, I'm not going to, reiterate things that have already been said. I will say that, so I recently ran for reelection to my school board seat. And when I was canvassing, so out knocking on doors and talking to voters, um, you know, book bans are extremely unpopular, and that transcends partisan political divides. They are extremely unpopular with virtually everyone, and people are very, very opposed to the idea of them. They have I mean, I'll put it like this: is the way the young people would say, it's toxic branding at this point. Like it is, and people don't really want to have anything to do with it. And so, I think it's important. When I was speaking to voters, one point that I continue to make is as a parent of myself of kids that read, the scaffolding for this argument for bans is usually something to do with parents' rights. And you know, my point was that um, I decide as a parent what is and is not appropriate for my children to read. And I told you that my oldest one, I mean, he's been reading adult level books now for 3 years. His favorite authors, Stephen King. He just finished the Game of Thrones series and he's 12 and a half. And my husband and I determined that he was mature enough to handle that kind of content. So it's not for any school board member or any state representative or any congressional, it's not for any position of elected authority to determine what is and is not appropriate for my son to read. And so, even if a person would individually disagree with my husband's and my decision to okay those books for him, protecting my authority to make that decision protects their authority to make a different decision. And that's the collective agreement. That's the agreement that we all enter into. That's the democracy of this at work. And so that's truly what parent rights means. Book bans are anti-parent rights. It's a trick to give up your intrinsic authority as a parent. It's exactly the opposite of what it purports to be. And most voters are completely aware and in agreement with such a thing. It's a very toxic idea. The other thing that I think it's important to understand is that um, the group calling for these sorts of book bans is so small, I wouldn't even call it a minority. I mean, that's how minuscule it is. And the passionate and they're angry, but they're largely standing very much alone. And I think it's really important to recognize that the true aim, I believe, is not even necessarily the book bans, um, as ridiculous as a proposal that they are to begin with. The idea is to make school board meetings or village council meetings or library meetings or state floor debates in state houses or congressional debates as chaotic and toxic and potentially violent as possible. And it makes it so distasteful that most people self-select themselves out of the process. So that means, your typical person who kind of hears about something going off at the library board meeting, they see a clip on whatever news show that they see, and they're like, I won't want anything to do with that, even though they disagree, and they would rather just stay home. And that cedes space to these very loud and very passionate individuals. And that's the way this is designed to function. The book bans are just a mechanism for a larger campaign of intimidation. when you can't win power electorally, this is an anti-democratic means to try and control the room, essentially, if you can't win the votes. Instead, you just be the loudest person in the room, and you make the room so distasteful to be in that you're the only one left. And that's the way this is really designed to function. And that's why, even if you're not a reader and you much prefer to watch YouTube, it's still really, this is still a really, really important issue because of, I think, its true purpose. And I think it's just important for people to be aware of how this really functions.
100%. So much. Like, I agree with everything both of you just said. And I had a thought, but it's escaped me. So I guess we will move on to the, I was just going to say that book bans seem to be like this larger attack on public education as a whole. Like, it's not just about the book or just about the legislative position. Like, it's like, let's call it what it is. It's a blatant attack on public education.
And that's why you're seeing attacks beyond the books. You're seeing attacks on educators and librarians as well. We are being labeled with all kinds of vile epithets, career-ending epithets that are just unconscionable. But they're going beyond the inanimate object to attack the people, to discredit education entirely.
Yes, I would 100% agree. Okay, so let's see. We're getting down on time, so let me see. Let's say there were some really good questions. I want to make sure we're active. So here we go. While the current movement attacking literature is clearly, here, and I just said that, a targeted campaign to suppress the free flow of information on topics that a small percentage of Americans seem to fear, there is an argument to be made regarding the age appropriateness of certain content in schools, like sex or violence. What alternative, and I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I do think it's important to have these conversations. What alternative approaches can be taken to address concerns about controversial or challenging content in books without resorting to bans? And what role should parents, educators, and society play in promoting informed decision-making regarding book selection rather than resorting to the bans? And let's go to Kim first this time.
So as I said, I'm a former English teacher, a passionate bookworm, and I am a hardliner about this kind of topic. My answer would first and foremost be a proper classification of library materials. Things should be properly classified. Things should be properly classified by genre and section. I know that a big change since even I was young, the big change in YA literature or junior literature, that genre has just exploded. I mean, really, I had 3 books to choose from. I could do The Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, or R.L. Stine. I mean, that was really it. But that's just not the case anymore. That section of the library has grown by leaps and bounds over the last few years, last few decades. And so I think it's really important for libraries to be properly classifying their materials so that kids know where things are and kids know where to head to content that they actually want to partake in, and know where to find things that they're after, and implicitly walk past things that they're not after. I think that's really, really important. I also think it's important to maintain kind of an open door invitational policy. This was really helpful when I taught comprehensive sex education and violence prevention content to children, is you be extremely transparent with parents so that there's no gray areas where miscreants can create clouds of misinformation that have no basis in fact, and so that parents are invited to collaborate with you on this community commitment to raise our children, right? So welcome parents in, be happy to show them around the library, be happy to show them the books that are on the shelves, prove that there's really nothing to hide and really empower parents to perform the ultimate role of deciding what is and is not appropriate for their children. I know that there are some, I think, well-intentioned efforts that I've read in passing in the news about school boards who are trying to compromise with these people who are calling for book bans, to say like, well, you don't have to take it out of the library, just put it in a special restricted section. And I don't believe that that is appropriate. I think that it's compromising with these people is the road to nowhere, and it's not anything that people actually want. I think ultimately it's the parents' decision and caring adults' decision to be able to make those determinations for their children, their best position to do so. And so properly classifying your materials to empower children to find what it is that they're looking for and walk past things that they don't want or aren't ready for. And then inviting parents and caring adults into the library to work with you on supporting them and making those determinations is the best way forward.
I love that. I love that. Martha, what do you have to add?
Well, I'm going to be feisty and take exception with the premise of the question, which is based on the idea of age appropriate. And I think, as Kim's son has taught us, that age appropriate might be a misnomer. Kim's son is 12. He has just finished the Game of Thrones series. He would be highly discontented if we restricted him to the Hardy Boys, for example.
Yeah.
So, and I work with teenagers all the time, and I can tell you that you can take two 14-year-olds and you're never going to find two who are identical in terms of their maturity, their intelligence, their reading ability, their awareness, their interests. So, in terms of what they can handle. So I think it's more appropriate perhaps to talk about age relevant rather than age appropriate, and let the kids and the parents decide together what they can handle, what themes and topics are relevant for them at that time. Now, because I'm talking about teenagers, they're my main focus. Like it or not, red alert. Sex is an appropriate topic for teens.
For teens, yeah.
They are going through puberty. They are fascinated with their bodies and the bodies of others and what they can do with them. And they're coming to recognize themselves as sexual beings, to understand their own sexual and gender identity. And it's criminal to not give them access to information about that. And nature set it up that way, not librarians. We're not indoctrinating anybody. We're giving kids the information they want and need. But having said that, it's understandable that parents are going to be concerned about, well, what kind of content are their kids accessing on that topic? And rest assured that librarians, through our professional training, are seeking out the very best content from reputable publishers and authors to put in our school and public libraries to reflect the fullness of the human experience. Now, rather than banning books, what can parents do if they are uncomfortable with, say, a book that a student brings home or material that they hear about in the library? One, they can read it. That might be a good idea. Two, they can talk to their kids about what their requirements or expectations are about their reading behavior, so that the kids understand what the parents want. And if parents have a reason to not trust that their own children will follow their family guidelines, they can call the librarian, the school librarian or the public librarian, and have a conversation and say, listen, my kid's not ready to handle this particular book. Can you do me a solid and not check this particular book out to my student? I would never turn down a request like that from a parent. I can very easily put a note in that student's library record, and if that student should present that book to me, I could say, I'm sorry, mom and dad don't want you to have this one right now, but maybe I can give you a few other suggestions. And the same thing could happen in that initial conversation with the parent too. We know our collections very well, and we can make some alternative suggestions, but there's no need or reason to take that book away from every other reader.
I love that. I love what both of you ladies said. And that was the kind of the conversation that question was meant to encourage, because, there are, there is justification that certain books might not be appropriate for a third grader. And so like having those exact conversations, like talking about classifying them sort of by age, it gives you kind of, or like the option of putting in notes, don't check this book out to my kid. Like those are alternatives so that those books can be, they can be left available to everybody else. And so this has been amazing. There were so many questions we didn't even get to, but I want to give you each a couple minutes to kind of see, is there anything you want to add, anything that you want to talk about that you have coming up that you're doing that's really exciting, or, tell us how you are. If that's how you want to use your couple minutes.
Well, I'll tell you something that's really exciting. And this is something that Matt knows all about, which is that taking a cue from our friends in Illinois, we in New Jersey have recently introduced our own anti-book banning bill. And I'm very happy about the way that came about. I didn't tell you about my whole story about having been the center of a book banning attack, and we saved 5 LGBTQ books, but that happened in the fall of 2021, and since that time I have had like a second full-time job as being an advocate for the right to read, and I spend almost every weekend kind of on the stump doing presentations. And in the middle of April, I was doing a presentation for the Hunterdon County Democrats, and in attendance at that presentation was State Senator Andrew Zwicker. And after that presentation, he came up and said to me, "What can I do to help from a legislative point of view?" And I said, "Oh, thank you for asking. One of the things you could do is take a look at what they're doing over there in Illinois. I want us to do the same thing." Well, lo and behold, I wish I had known I had this superpower earlier. A month later, what's the guy go and do? He introduces the bill, and as he interviews with people, tells them he was inspired by your girl. So I feel like I'm glad I'm feisty and a loudmouth. I actually did something. But I want to encourage everybody out there listening to do something too, because we are in a very dangerous moment in history. And it's one that my friends at PEN America, the National Coalition Against Censorship, and the American Library Association tell me is unprecedented. So we cannot sit idly by and wait for somebody to do something about it. We, each one of us, are the somebody. So what can you do? Number one, stay informed. I want to recommend to you the weekly censorship roundup on bookriot.com, bookriot.com. It's put together by another Illinois person, the amazing Kelly Jensen, who indexes local censorship news from around the country. So no matter where you are, Kelly's got you covered. You need to go to Board of Education meetings. I have no children myself. I go to multiple Board of Education meetings a week just to keep my eye on what's going on. And you need to do that in your community as well. Support library programs in your public library, especially those that are related to marginalized groups. Your attendance shows that those programs matter. Post your support for intellectual freedom on social media so that your friends know your opinion, your friends have the resources, and they can advocate too. And of course, most importantly, you must vote, especially for mainstream Board of Education candidates like Kim. And the simplest thing you can do is join uniteagainstbookbans.org. Uniteagainstbookbans.org is a national coalition. Partners include the American Library Association, GLAAD, People for the American Way. And on its website, you will find an online action toolkit that gives you tons of social media resources and even more ideas for actions you can take. Now, you don't have to do everything I just mentioned, but you've got to do something because without you, without me, without all of us, hate will win.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's really, really important. Because remember how I said how this is really designed to function. It's these people, as much as they don't want to admit it, they know that they're vastly outnumbered. And so they want to make the behavior so distasteful that the rest of us just give up and cede our power to them and let them be the loudest voices in the room. And so that's a decision that we all have to make, is to say no. I'm not going to do that. And there are plenty of ways that we just went over. There's lots of ways to get involved. It's really, really important to recognize this for exactly what it is, and to make the decision according to your own individual ability and your own individual capacity to take a stand and say no on behalf of yourself, on behalf of your children if you have any, and if you don't, on behalf of your neighbor's children, and on behalf of your community. I mean, the fact is that we live in a very, very large, a very diverse country with a wide range of people, and our institutions should reflect that reality. And there's no reason why they shouldn't, just because we've got a couple of people who find that reality too scary to cope with, and so react in this way. And so it's important just to recognize what's happening, and then look at what you have the ability to do and the capability to do, and then get involved. Even if it's just raising awareness, but I would say certainly attend your local meetings. Your library board meetings are usually even less attended than your school board meetings. And I'm sure that they would love to see you show up and say hello. But this is really where the rubber hits the road, and this is really where the work happens, is you start local. And honestly, I think it's really, once you try it, if you've never gone to a meeting like this before, once you go, and I think it's very affirming, because a lot of us, regardless of our political spectrum here, where we land on it in the United States, when we think about politics, which has become increasingly nationalized, Washington feels like it has very little to do with most of us. It doesn't really represent any of our interests. 90% of us, on either the left or the right, really represents the corporations and the wealthy individuals who fund those campaigns. And so a lot of times, a lot of us feel like the vote that we maybe show up to do doesn't really matter all that much. The change that happens doesn't necessarily seem to make our lives any better. But that is very, very different in your local community, your local school boards, your local village council, your local library boards. Your vote really matters. Your voice really matters. And it's very affirming to experience that actually you do make a difference just by showing up on a Thursday night. It's important to do.
That's interesting that you talk about that, because that's one of the things that I think people don't always understand, especially when they first start voting, is that the further down the ballot an office is, the more likely it is going to have significant impact on your day-to-day life. And that's something that I think we need to convey more strongly as we get our messages out. So I want to thank both of you ladies, and even though she's not here, Representative Syed, thank you so much. Kim, thank you, Martha. This has been so amazing. And it's just been an honor to talk to both of you ladies. I want to rewatch it and soak it all up again. But I did want to make sure that everybody out there listening knows that we have more great programming coming up. We're going to be having, in July, we're going to be having programming on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then later on in August, we're going to be talking about parent engagement. And so those are both really important topics as we get into this further. And I'm just really excited for what those.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Yes.
I enjoyed it
Thank
too.
you.
Nice meeting you, Kim.
Nice meeting you too.
Thank you.